Identity is what we think of ourselves and what we think of others. It's the attributes that we have that are meaningful to us and make us who we are. The text refers to identity as markers of who we are, allowing ourselves and others to be recognized in meaningful ways. This is on page 4 of chapter 4. It's also described as similarities and differences. On page 104, it says identity always involves a tension between similarities and differences. They are at the very heart of identity. In other words, it would be hard to identify as someone with no one to compare your identity to. How are you going to notice someone is similar to you or different without having anything to compare to? The text discusses how identity is helpful for understanding culture and identity because it says similarity is essential because of our unique personal identity only becomes a factor socially when we share a larger group membership with others. Then it goes into talking about being the only American in a group of people and how it might make them unique at one level, but it prevents them from seeing their full self at another. Then we continue this by talking about the girl from France and how everyone identified her as a French girl for years, and that was her identity because that was what made her different from everyone else. The relationship between communication and identity is connected because it both reflects and is constitutive of it. Page 113 is where that is at. When we feel familiar enough with someone to distinguish them from others, we know what to expect. This means we have a conversation with them in a more meaningful way because we know their social or personal identity. When we know what the person does, it constitutes it. Our own communicative choices from our identity as well as situations. As it says on page 117, we learned in the very first chapter, all meaning and communication is to some extent situational. Thus, the context mediates what identities we choose. I think the relationship between identity and communication functions the same in real life as it does in the text because how I communicate with people is different based on what identity I am in. The example being I am a photographer, a teacher, a mother. If I am talking to another photographer, our communication is going to be about photography with a metaphorical business cap on. If I am talking as a teacher, I'm going to be more direct and assertive, but also kind and gentle. As a mother, my communication style is going to vary depending on the situation, but it's going to be in a way my kids will understand. And all these examples are different from how I'd like to talk to my friends or how I talk to my friends who I've known for 10 plus years. So I think the text is pretty accurate for real life circumstances. One of my identities is a photographer, as I stated before. When I first started photography, I was more into figuring out how to work my camera or use Photoshop. With my identity, it has changed over time because now I know how to run a better business and I talk more about what equipment to buy and what lenses I should get and how I can run my business more efficiently. This relates to the text because, as the text states, identities are social creation and can change over time through interaction. This is found on page 103. The interactions I've had with other fellow photographers have helped me become better and change my focus from one aspect of my business to another. Before I started to assert or avow myself into this photographer identity, I felt like the identity I avowed was not ascribed to me by others because of their expectations about the behaviors I should have associated with the identity. The concept I'm referring to is on pages 118 to 120 of the text. The pathways to identity are avow and description. Avow are identities we envision for ourselves. The text describes it as how we try to fit ourselves into the idea of what is allowed and expected for the identities we envision for ourselves. On page 118, this means whatever identity we feel our characteristics and attributes go in line with that identity. Ascription is the identity we are assigned by others. Sorry. That text describes it as the process of having identity to you by others. The importance of these pathways is regardless if you avow to identify as someone, ascription may not always fit what you avow to be. I cannot say I believe there is much in the chapter the author could have expanded on. He did well discussing the social and personal identities, role expectations, and communication relationships to identity. If I had to choose, I would say language expectations We were given one example on page 112 about the student joining Latina group, but did not get much more detailed information about why the concept is important from the author. I think he could have expanded further on the communicative competencies that carry with them much power at all levels of social interaction.